There are documents that should never be written, not because their contents are false, but because they contain a truth so unflinching, so profoundly unsettling, that their very existence threatens the fragile architecture of our collective peace of mind. They are the digital ghost stories of the modern age, buried deep within firewalled servers, accessible only by a handful of individuals who carry the weight of that knowledge like a low-grade fever. We have come to learn of one such document. It has no dramatic public-facing title. It is known only by a sterile, cryptic codename that belies the apocalypse locked within its data, Scenario X. This is not a work of speculative fiction, nor is it a theoretical exercise in abstract mathematics. It is a forensic analysis of a disaster that never happened. It is the autopsy of a world that was, by the thinnest of margins, never allowed to die. The story begins, as so many modern secrets do, not with a whisper in a darkened room, but with the silent, autonomous hum of a machine that never sleeps. We have placed our faith and our future in a global network of sentinels. We see their gleaming domes on remote mountaintops, their arrays pointed towards the heavens, and we are comforted. We believe they are watching for us, cataloging the known threats, the city-killer asteroids on predictable clockwork orbits. We are told the sky is vast, but largely understood. This is the story we tell ourselves, a lullaby of cosmic safety sung across generations. Scenario X is the document that proves this lullaby a lie. It reveals a chilling counter-narrative, one where the greatest dangers are not the lumbering giants we have been tracking for decades, but the silent, high-velocity phantoms that slip through our nets. The document itself is a masterpiece of clinical dread. Its pages are not filled with prose, but with telemetry data, orbital mechanics, and probability assessments that, when properly decoded, paint a portrait of planetary annihilation. It models an event that transpired in near-complete secrecy, an encounter so swift and so unexpected that it was over before most of the world's astronomical institutions even knew it had begun. This was no sluggish asteroid drifting in from the familiar belt between Mars and Jupiter. The object at the heart of Scenario X was an interloper, a cosmic vagabond on a trajectory so eccentric, so wild, it defied conventional classification. It was a ghost in the gravitational machine, a splinter of interstellar night that had wandered into our serene celestial neighborhood with the subtlety of a rifle bullet. And it was detected, not by chance, not by a lone astronomer with a lucky photograph, but by a system that was specifically designed to hunt for such nightmares. You have likely never heard its name, and that is by design. It is called the 3I Atlas Network. The Inter-Hemispheric Impact Intelligence System, coupled with the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System. It is more than a collection of telescopes. It is a planetary nervous system, a unified, artificially intelligent guardian that sifts through the blizzard of cosmic data, looking for the one snowflake that is moving too fast, the one glint of light that is on the wrong path. 3I Atlas is the silent watcher, the sleepless algorithm tasked with connecting the faintest of dots across the sky, charting the trajectories of objects that would have been dismissed as mere digital noise just a decade ago. It is the planet's automated defense grid, our first, and in this case our only line of defense. Scenario X is the logbook of what 3I Atlas saw. It's the official classified record of a near miss that strains the very definition of the word near. The document models with terrifying precision what would have happened if the object's path had been infinitesimally different. A deviation of just a few arc-seconds, a gravitational nudge from Jupiter centuries ago, a slightly different outgassing of volatile ices as it neared the Sun. Any of these minor cosmic perturbations, and the simulation ends, not with a flyby, but with a flash. The model doesn't just show a crater, it shows the cascading consequences. It visualizes the thermal pulse, vaporizing entire regions, the atmospheric shockwave circling the globe for weeks, the ensuing winter that would collapse agriculture, and the geopolitical destabilization that would inevitably follow. The document is not an alarmist prediction. It is a calculated, dispassionate eulogy for a civilization that for a few terrifying hours was balanced on the edge of a knife. The most insidious part of this story is not the existence of the threat itself. We have always known on some primal level that we are adrift in a cosmic shooting gallery. No, the truly chilling revelation is the silence that followed. The conscious, deliberate decision to withhold the full nature of this encounter from the public. Imagine the scientists and officials who watched this data stream in. They saw a ghost materialize from the interstellar darkness, moving at a speed that defied easy explanation. They tracked it as it sliced through the plane of our solar system, its trajectory, a razor-thin line that would either pass harmlessly by or intersect directly with the third planet from the Sun. They held their breath, ran the calculations 1,000 times, and watched as this celestial bullet threaded a cosmic needle with our world. And when it was over, when the object was once again receding into the blackness from which it came, they were faced with a choice. Do you tell the world that its collective existence was just subject to a game of chance, on a scale it cannot possibly comprehend? Do you reveal that our most advanced systems, our vaunted planetary defense initiatives, were only just barely sufficient to provide a few hours of warning, a warning that, had the trajectory been terminal, would have been utterly useless? What good is knowing the end is coming if you are powerless to stop it? The authors of Scenario X chose silence. They chose to contain the truth, to classify the event not as a triumphant validation of our detection systems, but as a terrifying vulnerability that must never see the light of day. The fear was that the truth would not inspire preparedness, but paralysis. It would shatter the fragile illusion of control that underpins modern society. And so the near miss was sanitized its details, redacted its true nature, confined to the encrypted pages of this one apocryphal document. The public might have heard a brief sterile mention of a newly discovered interstellar object making a distant pass, another dry astronomical headline easily lost in the noise of the daily news cycle. But the raw data, the sheer terrifying proximity of the encounter, the kinetic energy this object carried that was buried under layers of classification, accessible only to those who now had to live with the knowledge of how close we truly came. This document, this Scenario X, is the key. It is the Rosetta Stone for an event we were never meant to understand. Its leak was not an act of espionage or a grand conspiracy. It was a crack in the dam of secrecy, a slow drip of information that has allowed us for the first time to piece together the full story. And it forces us to ask a new set of questions. We are no longer asking if a major impact could happen, but how we would react when we discover one is already on its way. Scenario X is not just about an object in space. It is a mirror. It reflects our own anxieties, our technological hubris, and our profound fragility. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we are not the masters of our own destiny. We are passengers on a small blue ship navigating an ocean filled with unseen hazards. For every threat, we successfully identify and track how many more slip by their passage unnoticed, their potential for destruction uncalculated. The 3I Atlas system represents a monumental leap in our ability to watch the skies, a testament to human ingenuity. But the event detailed in this leaked file suggests that we have only just opened our eyes. We have built a floodlight that illuminates a tiny patch of an infinite dark forest, and we have just witnessed a predator of unimaginable speed and power flit through the very edge of that light. What else is out there moving through the shadows? What other near misses have gone completely undetected? Our survival owed not to our cleverness but to sheer dumb luck. This is the starting point of our investigation. We will peel back the layers of classification surrounding Scenario X. We will speak to the astronomers who have seen pieces of the data, the policy experts who understand the protocols of secrecy, and the engineers who are building the next generation of planetary defense systems. We will reconstruct the timeline of this secret encounter from the first faint ping on a 3I Atlas sensor to the final receding dot of light disappearing back into the void. The document is more than a simulation. It is a warning. It is a message from a future that almost was a future of fire and dust. It tells us that the universe is not hostile, but it is profoundly indifferent. The laws of physics that govern the orbits of planets are the same laws that can send a mountain-sized rock hurtling towards us at 100,000 miles per hour. There is no malice, no intent. There is only gravity, velocity, and the cold, hard mathematics of collision. The story of Scenario X is the story of humanity coming face to face with that indifference. It is about the moment our technological confidence was shaken to its core by a single silent object that reminded us of our true place in the cosmos. We are not a protected species living in a celestial garden. We inhabit a dynamic, chaotic, and sometimes violent system. For too long we have been content with our ignorance, comforted by the vast emptiness between the stars. But that emptiness is not truly empty. It is populated by wanderers, exiles from other star systems, ancient debris from the formation of our own, and occasionally their random walks intersect with our own predictable path. The document that has been brought into the light is our guide to understanding what happens when those paths cross. It is a chillingly detailed blueprint of our own vulnerability. It forces us to move beyond the abstract and into the specific, to confront not just the times of an impact, but the detailed second-by-second physics of how our world would unmake itself. Before we delve into the specific orbital mechanics, before we analyze the object's composition and likely origin, we must first appreciate the weight of this secret. Consider the burden placed upon the few who knew. They had to carry on with their daily lives, attend meetings and file reports, all while possessing the knowledge that our civilization's continued existence had been for a few critical hours a statistical improbability. They watched the world go on blissfully, unaware of the cosmic dodgeball it had just played. They understood in a way the rest of us could not, that the line between a normal Tuesday and the end of history is terrifyingly thin. Scenario X was their attempt to quantify that terror, to transform the raw emotional shock of the event into a set of actionable data points and contingency plans. It was an attempt to impose order on a fundamentally chaotic event, to learn from a catastrophe that by sheer chance never occurred. It is a document born from the profound realization that our planetary defense is not a fortress wall. It is a spider's web, and we had just witnessed something tear through it without even slowing down. The story of what happened is etched into the data streams, the orbital plots, and the impact simulations contained within its files. We are about to open that file. We are about to relive the encounter that was hidden from us, to stand alongside the silent machines and the handful of humans who tracked this ghost as it approached our home. This is not just an astronomical event, it is a reckoning. It is the moment we are forced to look up and truly comprehend the scale and the stakes of our journey through space. The quiet confidence of the past is gone, replaced by the sobering knowledge contained within a document that was never supposed to exist. A document that begins not with a number or a date, but with a quiet, terrifyingly simple title that sets the stage for everything that follows. Threat Assessment, Unidentified Interstellar Object 31, 2027 Atlas. The name of the ghost itself. Now, let us begin. What is the single greatest paradox of the human condition? Perhaps it is that for our entire existence, we have looked to the very same sky for both salvation and doom. It is our window to the infinite, the source of our myths, our poetry, our most profound scientific questions. The celestial tapestry above has been our clock, our calendar, and our compass, a source of predictable beauty and reassuring constancy. And yet woven into that same fabric of wonder is a quiet, persistent, and utterly indiscriminate threat. A threat that does not reason, does not negotiate, and has been patiently waiting since the dawn of the solar system itself. For millennia, we didn't have the language for this threat. Instead, we had omens. Our ancestors gathered around flickering fires, saw comets as fiery serpents dragged across the heavens, portents of plague, the fall of kings, the wrath of silent gods. Shooting stars were not debris burning in the atmosphere, but fleeting glimpses of the divine or souls ascending to the afterlife. These were humanity's first attempts to read the cosmic narrative, to find meaning in the random violent flashes that momentarily tore the sky asunder. They were stories we told ourselves to make sense of a universe that seemed both intimately connected to us and terrifyingly indifferent. In the shattered fragments of meteorites that survived their fiery descent, they found sacred objects, gifts, or warnings from another realm, rocks that were quite literally not of this world. These sky stones were proof that the heavens could reach down and touch the earth, sometimes with a whisper, and they feared, sometimes with a fist. But this was the realm of priests and shamans, of faith and folklore. The sky was a canvas for our hopes and our anxieties, its true nature veiled behind a curtain of divine mystery. The slow, grinding gears of science began to change everything. The Enlightenment brought the telescope, and with it a new perspective. The heavens were not some ethereal, perfect realm, but a place of staggering mechanical precision governed by laws. Isaac Newton gave us the mathematics of gravity, revealing the elegant clockwork dance of the planets. These celestial bodies, once gods and goddesses, were demoted to worlds, great spheres of rock, ice, and gas, held in their orbits by the same force that pulls an apple from a tree. This new understanding was in its own way deeply comforting. It suggested a universe of order, a cosmos you could predict. Comets were no longer divine messengers, but dirty snowballs on long elliptical journeys around the sun. Asteroids, first discovered as faint points of light between Mars and Jupiter, were simply the leftover rubble from the solar system's construction, a belt of cosmic debris that had failed to coalesce into a planet. The universe, it seemed, was a grand but ultimately safe machine. We were passengers on a world following a stable, predictable path. The phantom punches of the ancient sky had been explained away, demystified by the cool, unwavering logic of physics. But science, in its relentless pursuit of truth, eventually uncovers uncomfortable realities. And in the latter half of the 20th century, geologists and paleontologists began to uncover the clues to a cosmic crime scene, one of unimaginable scale, buried for 66 million years. It began not with a telescope, but with a microscope. A thin layer of clay found in geological strata all around the globe, marking the boundary between the age of dinosaurs and the rise of mammals. Within this layer, scientists found a shocking anomaly, an extraordinary concentration of the element iridium. On Earth, iridium is incredibly rare in the crust, having mostly sunk to the planet's core during its formation, but it is abundant in asteroids and comets. The implication was staggering, almost unbelievable. This thin, dark line in the rock was a tombstone, the settled dust from a cataclysm that had enveloped the entire world. The hunt was on for the murder weapon, the point of impact, and it was found half hidden beneath the turquoise waters of the Gulf of Mexico, a gargantuan scar in the planet's crust over 100 miles wide, the Chicxulub crater. What followed was a revelation that permanently altered our species' self-perception. We could now reconstruct the last day of the dinosaurs with chilling accuracy. We could imagine the object, a mountain 6 miles across, screaming through the atmosphere at 40,000 miles per hour. It would have punched a hole, not just in the air but in space-time itself, hitting the shallow sea with the force of 10 billion atomic bombs. The initial flash would have been brighter than the sun, instantly vaporizing trillions of tons of rock and water. A shockwave of unimaginable power would have raced outwards, flattening everything for 1,000 miles in every direction. Mega tsunamis, miles high, scoured the coastlines of continents. But the real killer was the sky itself. Trillions of tons of pulverized rock and soot were blasted into the stratosphere, shrouding the entire planet in a thick, impenetrable blanket of darkness. The sun vanished, Photosynthesis ceased. The great ecological engine of the planet sputtered and died. Temperatures plummeted into a brutal artificial winter that lasted for decades. The food chain collapsed from the bottom up, and the titans that had ruled the Earth for 150 million years were wiped from existence in a geological blink of an eye. This wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a message written in stone and extinction. The comforting clockwork solar system of Newton was gone. In its place was a far wilder, more chaotic environment, a cosmic shooting gallery. And we, humanity, were living on one of the targets. The sky was falling after all. It had fallen before, and it would fall again. This realization sent a profound and unsettling tremor through the scientific community. It was one thing to know this intellectually. It was another to see the evidence etched into the very rock beneath our feet. Suddenly, humanity's entire history, all our art, our wars, our triumphs, our love, seemed to be taking place on borrowed time, during a lucky lull in the cosmic bombardment. The Tunguska event in 1908, where an object exploded over Siberia with the force of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, leveling 800 square miles of forest, was no longer a bizarre anomaly. The Chelyabinsk meteor in 2013, which exploded in a flash 30 times brighter than the sun, injuring over 1,000 people with its shockwave, was no longer a once-in-a-century spectacle. They were warning shots. They were reminders from the cosmos that the space beyond our thin blue atmosphere is not empty. It is filled with millions of objects, from the size of pebbles to the size of mountains, their orbits intersecting our own in a complex three-dimensional dance of gravity. Most would burn up harmlessly, but not all of them. The math was inescapable. It was not a question of times, if times a major impact would happen again, but a question of times when, asterisk. For the first time in our 4.5 billion year history, one species on this planet had the intelligence to understand the threat and the technology to potentially do something about it. To simply wait for extinction felt like an abdication of our responsibility, a betrayal of our own consciousness. And so from this dawning, terrifying awareness, a new field of science was born: planetary defense. It was an idea of breathtaking ambition. To move from being passive victims of celestial chance to becoming active guardians of our own world. The challenge was immense, requiring a level of global cooperation rarely seen outside of science fiction. National rivalries, political squabbles, and military distrust had to be set aside for a common cause, because a planet-killer asteroid does not recognize national borders. It carries no flag. Its allegiance is only to gravity and its trajectory. After decades of proposals, conferences, and tireless advocacy by a dedicated few, the world's leading spacefaring nations came together to forge an unprecedented alliance. They called it the International Impact Initiative, or 3I for short. Its charter was simple and profound: to find, track, and characterize any near-Earth object large enough to pose a significant threat to life on this planet. It was humanity's first collective attempt to seize control of its own cosmic destiny. The 3I was more than a scientific collaboration. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that we would no longer be ignorant observers staring up at the sky in fear. We would build ourselves a sentry. We would build ourselves an eye. And the crown jewel of the 3I, the culmination of trillions of dollars and the brightest minds from 20 different nations, was a system known by a single powerful name: Atlas. Atlas, the asteroid tracking and lunar anomaly system, is arguably the most complex and sophisticated surveillance network ever created. It is not one telescope, but a sentient web of them, a dozen observatories positioned strategically across the globe, from the high arid plains of the Atacama Desert to the frozen peaks of Antarctica. Linked by quantum-entangled communication relays and synchronized to the atomic second, their crystalline eyes work in perfect concert, creating a single seamless planetary field of view. Night after night, As the Earth turns, one set of telescopes hands off its watch to the next, ensuring there is never a moment of blindness, never a gap in the vigil. They do not hunt for the beautiful distant nebulae that grace astronomy magazines. Their gaze is fixed closer to home on our own cosmic backyard, sifting through the darkness for the faintest glimmers of light, the almost imperceptible movements that betray the presence of an object on the move. The true power of Atlas, however, is not in its optics, but in its mind. A vast network of supercomputers housed in climate-controlled bunkers deep underground acts as the system's central nervous system. Every night they receive a flood of data, petabytes of information that would overwhelm any human team. Sophisticated algorithms refined over decades tear through this digital deluge. They perform a cosmic triage, cross-referencing every new detection against a catalogue of millions of known objects. The software flags anything new, anything that has deviated from its predicted path, anything whose gravitational whispers suggest an orbit that might one day intersect with our own. Within minutes of detection, Atlas can project an object's trajectory forward for centuries with astonishing precision. It can estimate its size, its rotation, its likely composition, painting a detailed portrait of a potential threat, while it is still hundreds of millions of miles away. It is the ultimate early warning system, a watchtower on the shores of the cosmic ocean designed to spot the incoming tide long before it reaches our shores. To the public, Atlas became a symbol of security, a technological marvel that had tamed the final frontier of natural disasters. News reports would periodically celebrate its latest milestones. The 5 millionth known asteroid catalogued the successful deflection test of the DART mission, a triumph guided by Atlas data. The confident proclamations from 3 IFTO spokespeople that 99% of all asteroids larger than a kilometer, the true planet killers, had been found and posed no threat for the foreseeable future. A quiet sense of relief settled over the global population. We had acknowledged the danger that wiped out the dinosaurs, and we had built a shield against it. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by the reassurance of data. The omens of the past had been supplanted by the orbital mechanics of the present. We believed we could see everything, that nothing could take us by surprise. The system was perfect, a testament to human ingenuity and foresight. We had finally built our guardian, our tireless eye in the night, believing perhaps too deeply that it could see all there was to see and that its gaze could never be averted. But that planetary shield, that meticulously constructed calm, was never designed for a ghost. It was built for the devils we knew, the well-lit, predictable travelers of the inner solar system. What it encountered on a Tuesday evening in late autumn was something else entirely. It began not with a bang, but with a flicker, a digital whisper so faint it was nearly lost in the torrent of data streaming from the Atlas observatories. A single automated alert, flagged for its sheer statistical improbability. One of the wide-field cameras, during its routine sweep of a patch of sky in the constellation Cetus, had registered a momentary occlusion. A pinprick of starlight had vanished for a fraction of a second, then reappeared. Not a cosmic ray hitting a sensor, not a satellite glint, not a faulty pixel. The system's algorithms, trained on petabytes of celestial noise, recognized it as a genuine transit. A shadow had passed, but there was nothing there. When the alert reached the human analysts at the University of Hawaii's Institute for Astronomy, the initial reaction was one of professional skepticism. The digital sky is a haunted place filled with phantoms and artifacts. They pulled up the archived frames, blinking them, stacking them, running them through every diagnostic filter in their arsenal, and there it was again, an infinitesimal dimming, lasting mere milliseconds across 4 separate exposures, taken seconds apart. This wasn't an instrument error. This was a track, a trajectory. Something had moved. Yet when they cross-referenced the coordinates with every known catalogue of asteroids, comets, and man-made debris, the result was a chilling, resounding void. Nothing. The object casting this fleeting shadow was uncatalogued, unknown, and based on the parallax shift between the frames alarmingly close. A new designation was provisionally assigned, a label reserved for anomalies of the highest order, Object X. You have to understand the profound difficulty of the task that now faced them. Finding a new asteroid is typically an act of seeing light. You look for a point of reflected sunlight moving against the fixed background of stars. Object X, however, was fundamentally different. Its albedo, or reflectivity, was so astonishingly low, it was barely distinguishable from the vacuum of space itself. It was less a rock and more a hole in the sky, a piece of cosmic velvet absorbing nearly everything that touched it. It could only be seen by what it blocked, a phantom on the celestial stage, defined only by its negative space. This made every subsequent observation an exercise in extreme astronomical patience and precision. The world's largest telescopes, instruments usually reserved for peering into the dawn of time, were now being turned towards our own cosmic backyard, hunting for a shadow. This was the beginning of the Great Ordeal, a 2-week period of relentless caffeine-fueled effort that pushed the global observation network to its absolute limit. Each new data point was a victory hard won against the darkness. A team in Chile, using the Very Large Telescope, would spend an entire night attempting to catch another stellar occultation, feeding their precious few astrometric points into the global network. An observatory in Arizona would try to bounce a radar signal off its presumed location, only to have that signal swallowed by the void, a result that was itself a crucial if terrifying piece of the puzzle. The object was not just dark, it was likely porous, a loose agglomeration of carbonaceous material that acted like a kind of gravitational stealth foam, absorbing radio waves instead of reflecting them. It was a cosmic nightmare, possessing all the mass and kinetic energy of an impactor, but cloaked in the perfect camouflage. With every passing hour, the orbital solution for Object X began to coalesce, the numbers whispered between observatories like a dreadful secret. At first, the uncertainty was enormous. The cone of probability, that vast three-dimensional region of space where the object might be stretched for millions of miles. Its path could take it harmlessly into the outer solar system, or it could curve it back towards the sun. It was a cosmic lottery, and for those first few days, the odds seemed comfortably in our favor. But the astronomers of Atlas and the newly alerted strategists at the 3I Command watched as a strange and deeply unsettling pattern began to emerge. Unlike a typical discovery where more data pushes the probability of an Earth impact towards zero, the opposite was happening. Each new observation, each hard-won photometric whisper from the darkness, seemed to systematically prune away the safe possibilities. The cone of uncertainty was shrinking, yes, but it wasn't shrinking times away, times from Earth. It was contracting times around times it. Imagine a vast translucent shape in space representing all the possible futures for Object X. With each data point, a part of that shape dissolves, revealing a clearer picture. The hope, the absolute professional expectation, is that the blue marble of Earth will be left floating far outside the boundaries of this shrinking form. But for Object X, the Earth remained stubbornly, horrifyingly inside. The refined calculations painted a portrait not of a harmless passerby, but of a celestial predator. It was moving at over 30 kilometers per second, a velocity far exceeding that of most asteroids originating from the main belt. This suggested it was an interloper, a visitor from the cold outer darkness of the Oort cloud, or perhaps even interstellar space flung into our system on a vast plunging trajectory. Its momentum was immense, a gravitational dagger aimed at the heart of the solar system. The tension inside the data centers became a palpable thing. The quiet hum of servers was now the soundtrack to a slow-motion crisis. Visualizations that were once abstract tools of science became objects of dread. On the main screen, a delicate blue-green line represented Earth's serene, predictable journey around the sun. And now cutting across it was another line rendered in a stark, cautionary red. As the orbital solution was updated in real time, that red line would twitch, sometimes moving slightly farther away, prompting a collective held breath of relief, only to snap back even closer with the next data ingestion. It was a form of psychological torture, the universe playing a shell game with the fate of our world. The astronomers were no longer just scientists. They were unwilling augurs, interpreting celestial mechanics to read a prophecy they desperately did not want to be true. They were watching a verdict being written in slow motion, one observation at a time. It was during the second week that the true scale of the confrontation became clear. The refined trajectory now showed Object X would not strike the Earth. The probability of a direct impact had finally mercifully dropped to near zero. But the relief was instantly replaced by a new, more insidious kind of fear. The object wasn't going to hit us, it was going to miss. But the margin of that miss was shrinking to a distance that was in cosmic terms non-existent. The projected path would take it inside the orbit of the Moon. It would pass closer to us than many of our own communications satellites. This was no longer a distant astronomical event, this was a home invasion. A near miss, on this scale, presented a host of catastrophic possibilities that had until now been the stuff of theoretical papers and disaster movies. The object was massive enough that its gravitational passage would be a violent affair. It would pass through the swarm of geosynchronous satellites like a bowling ball through pins, potentially crippling global communications and navigation in a single silent sweep. The greater fear, however, was something far more fundamental: the gravitational keyhole. A keyhole is a tiny, precise region of space-time near a planet. If an object passes through it, the planet's gravity will alter its trajectory in just the right or wrong way to guarantee a direct impact on a future orbit. It is the universe's way of setting a delayed action trap. Suddenly, the question was not just, will it miss us now, but, by missing us, will it seal our doom for later? The red line on the screen was now aimed directly at one of these invisible cosmic mines. The challenge for Atlas had shifted from simple detection to a task of almost unimaginable astrometric precision. They had to predict down to a few hundred kilometers exactly where a light-swallowing phantom would be millions of miles away, so they could determine if its shadow would fall across a gravitational trigger point no bigger than a small city. The system was being stressed to and beyond its designed capabilities. Every variable mattered. The faintest whisper of outgassing from the object, the subtle push of solar radiation pressure, each one a potential nudge that could mean the difference between a close shave and a guaranteed future apocalypse. This was the moment the alarm bells began to ring in the quiet, secure corridors of the 3I Command. The Interagency Impact Initiative was never just an astronomical organization. It was the designated intersection of science and national security, the place where abstract orbital mechanics were translated into tangible risk. The data streaming from the astronomers was stripped of its academic nuance and fed into threat assessment models. The language changed from parallax and albedo to probability of infrastructure loss, potential for mass panic, and geopolitical destabilization. What they saw terrified them. A public announcement was out of the question. Announcing a potential but not certain future impact was the dictionary definition of inciting global hysteria. Announcing a catastrophic near miss that could decimate our satellite infrastructure was equally untenable. The world's economies, its military commands, its very social fabric were now utterly dependent on that fragile orbital shell. To reveal its vulnerability was to invite chaos, so they began to work in secret. A select compartmentalized team was assembled, composed of astrophysicists, risk analysts, military strategists, and crisis managers. Their task was to game out the unthinkable. They were to operate on the worst-case assumption that Object X would pass through the keyhole, or that the near miss itself would trigger a cascade of failures that would plunge the world into a new kind of dark age. They needed a playbook for a planetary crisis the public didn't even know was happening. They needed a sequence of actions, a chain of command, a set of protocols for a scenario that had no precedent in human history. They gave this grim project a simple anodyne code name, a name that would appear on the cover of the most consequential document of the 21st century. They called it Scenario X. The initial drafts were stark, brutal things. They mapped out the cascading consequences of a total satellite blackout, the collapse of financial markets, the failure of power grids, the blinding of military forces, the instant cessation of GPS, which would ground planes and send shipping astray. They modeled the public reaction when the skies inevitably went dark and the frantic attempts to manage information in an environment where the primary means of communication had just been destroyed. They debated the threshold for revealing the truth to world leaders and then to the public. Each page was filled with impossible choices, a litany of lesser evils. The very act of writing the document felt like a transgression, like putting into words a future that should never be allowed to happen. While the astronomers of Atlas fought their war of light and shadow, trying to pin down a ghost with telescopes and equations, this secret team was waging a different kind of war. A war on paper against a future that was closing in at 30 kilometers a second. The two fronts of this silent conflict were inextricably linked. The data from the scientists was the ammunition for the strategists, and the scenarios of the strategists gave terrifying weight to every decimal point the scientists produced. The world in its blissful ignorance slept soundly, while in darkened rooms across the globe, the guardians of our fragile peace confronted the chilling possibility that the sky was indeed about to fall. The clock was ticking down not to an impact, but to a passage, a moment of truth that would determine if Object X was merely a terrifying visitor or the harbinger of a far more intimate and devastating encounter to come. Inside the heavily redacted pages bound by the sterile weight of classification, the truth was not written in the elegant language of astrophysics or the cautious prose of public policy. It was laid bare in the cold, unforgiving calculus of annihilation. This was not a report about a near miss. This was a post-mortem for a world that was never lost, an autopsy of a ghost civilization. They called it Scenario X, a designation so bland it felt like a deliberate, almost cynical understatement for the planetary nightmare it contained. The document begins not with a bang but with a whisper, a single terrifying variable. It posits a change in Object X's trajectory so infinitesimally small it defies human intuition. Imagine the width of a single human hair held up against the entire expanse of the North American continent. The simulation altered the comet's path by a fraction of that measure. A cosmic nudge, a whisper in the gravitational symphony. This was the core of its horror, the revelation that our survival had balanced on a knife's edge thinner than any blade we could ever forge. The document's authors, working in the silent hum of supercomputers, modeled what would happen if that celestial hair's breadth had been different. They moved the predicted point of entry from the silent vacuum of empty space to a new set of coordinates, a location chosen not for its population density, but for its potential to maximize global chaos. The target in Scenario X was no longer nothing. It was a deep ocean strike, specifically pinpointed at the western edge of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a place where the Earth's own tectonic fury is already coiled like a serpent. Here, the simulation begins, and the clinical language of the report melts away, replaced by the physics of doomsday. The first chapter of the simulation details the moment of contact. Object X, a half-kilometer mass of rock and exotic ices, does not simply splash into the ocean. At a velocity exceeding 70,000 kilometers per hour, the very concept of water ceases to exist. The report describes a phenomenon called a hydrodynamic explosion. In the first picosecond, an almost unimaginable quantity of kinetic energy is converted into pure incandescent heat. The ocean at ground zero is not boiled, it is vaporized instantaneously. A cavity is blasted into the sea miles wide and plunging all the way down to the abyssal plain, exposing the seabed to the raw vacuum of the entry corridor for a fleeting moment. The energy release is quantified in the report's margins, a number so large it requires scientific notation to even write down. It is the equivalent of detonating the entire world's nuclear arsenal, all of it at a single point every second for nearly a full minute. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns would have been visible from orbit, a new temporary star born in our own atmosphere. This initial blast creates a shockwave not of air, but of solid water and superheated steam, expanding outwards at hypersonic speeds. But that is merely the overture. The true cataclysm begins as gravity reasserts its dominion over the violated ocean. The walls of the temporary crater, towering cliffs of seawater miles high, collapse back in on themselves. Their collision at the epicenter creates a rebound splash of staggering proportions, ejecting a plume of vaporized rock and irradiated water high into the stratosphere. Simultaneously, this colossal disturbance displaces a volume of water that the human mind struggles to comprehend trillions of tons. This is the birth of the mega-tsunami. The report's simulations show not a single wave, but a series of them, a concentric ring of liquid destruction pulsing away from the impact site. Unlike a typical earthquake-generated tsunami, which is a displacement of the seafloor, this is a displacement of the entire water column. In the deep ocean, the wave would have been deceptively low, perhaps only a few meters high, but traveling at the speed of a commercial jetliner, a silent, unstoppable ripple of pure energy, passing unnoticed beneath any ship unfortunate enough to be in its path. But as this energy reached the continental shelves of Asia, Australia, and the Americas, its behavior would have transformed. As the water shallowed, the wave's incredible velocity would have been converted into terrifying height. The models, cross-referenced with paleogeological data from ancient impact events, paint a picture of biblical devastation. The first to be struck would be the islands of the Pacific. Not as a wave crashing on a beach, but as a sudden, astonishing rise in the sea level itself. The ocean would simply climb relentlessly, swallowing low-lying atolls and volcanic peaks in minutes, erasing entire nations and cultures from the map without a trace. Then the wavefront would reach the continents. The simulation focuses on the coast of Japan. The country's legendary seawalls, marvels of modern engineering designed to repel the worst nature could muster, would be rendered as inconsequential as lines drawn in the sand. The wave depicted in the analysis is not a cresting curl of water, it is a moving cliff, a vertical wall of black ocean, hundreds of meters high, capped with a churning aerosol of foam and debris. Its arrival would be heralded by a sound unlike any other in human history, a low-frequency roar that would shatter windows and vibrate deep within the human skeleton. The sound of an entire ocean being focused into a planetary-scale battering ram. The report includes chillingly precise inundation maps. Tokyo, Shanghai, Sydney, Los Angeles, Vancouver, all shown submerged under a torrent of salt water, moving with unimaginable force. The models are meticulous. They don't just show flooding, they show the systematic obliteration of infrastructure. The wave doesn't just wash over buildings, it scours them from their foundations. Bridges are not broken. They are twisted into unrecognizable knots of steel and swept miles inland. Power plants, ports, and communication hubs are not just damaged, they cease to exist. The sheer hydrodynamic pressure would liquefy soils, triggering underwater landslides that would compound the destruction, generating secondary tsunamis that would echo through the coastal canyons for days. The human cost, presented in stark statistical tables, is projected in the hundreds of millions for the first 6 hours alone. It's a loss of life so vast, it resets the course of human history. Yet, according to Scenario X, this was only the beginning of the end. The water was just the first executioner. The second phase of the catastrophe, detailed in the document, shifts from the oceans to the sky. The colossal plume of vaporized rock seawater, and cometary material ejected into the upper atmosphere would not simply fall back to Earth. The finest particles, an aerosol of superheated dust and sulfates, would be lofted by their own thermal energy into the stratosphere high above the weather. There, caught in the jet streams, this veil of debris would begin its inexorable spread around the globe. Within weeks, the report states the entire planet would be shrouded. The simulations model the effect on solar radiation. Sunlight, the energy source for nearly all life on Earth, would be choked off. The document uses the term impact winter, but the description is more akin to a permanent, planet-wide eclipse. Day would turn to a perpetual twilight, a dim, freezing dusk. The projections show global average temperatures plummeting by as much as 20 degrees Celsius. Photosynthesis on a global scale would grind to a halt. First, the phytoplankton in the oceans, the very base of the marine food web and the source of half our planet's oxygen, would die off. Then the crops on land, the world's breadbaskets in North America, Europe, and Asia, would fail in a single catastrophic growing season. The delicate cycle of agriculture, the foundation of our civilization for 10,000 years, would be broken. The report models the ensuing famine, the collapse of global food distribution networks, and the desperate violent competition for dwindling resources. It predicts a level of human suffering that makes the initial tsunami seem like a preamble. And still, the document drills deeper, peeling back another layer of our interconnected fragility. It moves beyond the physical destruction to the collapse of the systems that define our modern world. The initial impact and the subsequent tsunamis would have severed the vast majority of the world's submarine fiber optic cables, the physical tendons of the internet. Global communication, the instantaneous network that underpins our economies, governments, and social structures, would be silenced. The financial markets in New York, London, and Tokyo would not crash. They would simply vanish, their electronic data streams blinking out of existence. The world's economy, an abstract concept built on confidence and the flow of information, would evaporate in a matter of hours. Without power from coastal plants, without fuel from obliterated ports, without communication to coordinate a response, the intricate dominoes of modern society would fall one by one. Transportation networks would seize up. Clean water would stop flowing from taps. Healthcare systems, already overwhelmed by the injured, would collapse without electricity or supplies. The report makes a terrifyingly clear point: we have built a global civilization of such exquisite complexity that its very complexity has become its greatest vulnerability. It is a house of cards, and Scenario X was the gust of wind that proved it could be toppled with a single well-aimed blow. But the true turning point of the document, the revelation that transforms it from a work of speculative horror into a damning indictment, comes in its final annexes. Here, the authors turn their analytical gaze away from the hypothetical comet and back towards themselves, back towards the very systems and agencies meant to protect us. The report exposes in brutal detail the fundamental limitations of the Atlas warning system. It concedes that while Atlas was a triumph, it was a fragile one. The network had blind spots, particularly for objects approaching from the direction of the sun. It had operational downtimes. The simulation in Scenario X included a sub-model exploring what would have happened if the object had been discovered not with weeks to spare, but with mere days or even hours. The conclusion was stark: any plan for deflection would have been impossible. We would have been spectators to our own extinction. Even more damning was the analysis of global communication protocols. The document asked a simple, devastating question. If you knew the world was ending in 3 weeks, how would you tell everyone there was no plan? No single unified, trusted international body capable of delivering such news without triggering a global panic that would in itself be a disaster. Governments would have likely kept it secret, hoping for a miracle, paralyzed by the fear of societal breakdown. The silence from our leaders, the report suggests, would have been as deadly as the impact itself. The public, which had placed its faith in these vast, expensive programs, would have been betrayed by that silence. The very agencies designed to watch the skies were admitting internally that they were not just watching. They were gambling, and they knew the odds were far worse than anyone was ever told. This, then, was the ultimate payload of Scenario X. It wasn't the mega tsunami or the impact winter. It was the crisis of confidence. The document was a confession written in the secret language of the state that the shield we thought we had was riddled with holes. It revealed that our preparedness was an illusion, a comforting story we told ourselves while adrift in a cosmic shooting gallery. The near miss of Object X wasn't a success story of a system that worked. It was the story of a system that had been breathtakingly lucky. The leak of this document didn't just show us a terrifying what-if, it showed us what our own protectors truly thought of our chances. It proved that the greatest danger was never just the rock hurtling through space. It was the chilling gap between the reassurances we were given and the catastrophic vulnerability they knew we possessed all along. The trust once broken could never be fully restored. With the chilling architecture of Scenario X now laid bare before them, a profound silence fell. It was not the quiet of understanding, but the vacuum that precedes a storm, a stillness pregnant with the weight of an impossible choice. In conference rooms, shielded from electronic eavesdropping from Washington to Brussels, from Moscow to Beijing, the document became a toxic manuscript, passed between hands that seemed reluctant to even touch it. The raw data, the elegant but brutal mathematics, the cascading system failures, it predicted all of it, painted a portrait of a civilization standing on a precipice, blissfully unaware of the abyss yawning just beyond its feet. The question that echoed in these insulated chambers was no longer a scientific one of orbital mechanics or impact probabilities. It had metastasized into something far more volatile, far more human. What do we tell them? What does humanity do with the knowledge that its world is fundamentally unsafe, that the sky, our timeless symbol of constancy and peace, could betray us so completely? The initial consensus forged in the crucible of fear was a resounding and unified cry for containment. The argument presented by seasoned political strategists and sober-minded security chiefs was as compelling as it was terrifying. Releasing Scenario X in its unvarnished form, they argued, would be like pulling the pin from a global grenade. It wasn't about informing the public, it was about inciting a planetary panic from which there would be no recovery. They presented their own models, not of asteroid trajectories, but of human behavior under extreme duress. These were projections of financial markets evaporating overnight, of global supply chains grinding to a halt, not from a physical impact, but from the sheer psychological weight of the threat. They spoke of mass migrations away from coastlines, of riots born from the desperate belief that governments were hiding a secret salvation, a cosmic lifeboat for the elite. They envisioned the very framework of society, the delicate trust that allows billions of us to coexist, dissolving into a fine powder. This was the Guardian's paradox. To protect humanity, you must first deceive it. You must become the architect of a comfortable illusion, a necessary lie that holds the world together. The Director General of 3I, a man who had dedicated his life to the cold, hard light of empirical truth, now found himself its chief suppressor. He argued with a voice heavy with the burden of his conviction that the document was a weapon. In the hands of the public, it would inflict more certain damage than Object X ever could. Panic, he insisted, was a contagion without a cure, a psychological plague that would cripple our ability to mount any kind of coordinated response should the worst-case scenario ever truly materialize. We would be a civilization that had scared itself to death long before the asteroid arrived. He saw it as a terrible but necessary triage, sacrificing a painful truth to preserve the functional integrity of the whole. A classified stamp, he reasoned, was not a censor's tool, but a shield protecting the fragile psyche of a planet from a truth it was simply not equipped to handle. The official narrative would be carefully curated. Object X would remain a potentially hazardous asteroid, one of thousands, its near miss a statistical curiosity, a footnote in the celestial ledger. A close call, yes, but a manageable one. The public would be told what they needed to hear: that the systems worked, that the Guardians were watching, that the world was and would remain safe. And so the machinery of suppression began to turn. Scenario X was assigned a classification level so high it was effectively mythological, accessible only to a handful of individuals who now shared the lonely burden of knowing. Its digital copies were scrubbed from lower-level servers, its physical printouts were incinerated, its very name becoming a whisper in the halls of power. A parallel effort was launched to create a sanitized version of the data, a public-facing analysis that skillfully rounded the edges off the razor-sharp probabilities. The error bars on Object X's trajectory were subtly widened. The models of potential atmospheric fragmentation were tweaked to favor more benign outcomes. It was a masterpiece of disinformation constructed not by spies but by terrified scientists and policymakers who genuinely believed they were acting in the planet's best interest. They were building a firewall not for a computer network but for the collective consciousness of humankind. They were holding back the flood with a wall of paper and secrets, hoping the foundations would hold. But a secret of this magnitude exerts its own form of gravity. It pulls at the consciences of those who keep it, warping their sense of duty, their understanding of right and wrong. Within the very organizations sworn to protect this secret, a quiet rebellion was taking root. It didn't begin with a grand conspiracy, but with sleepless nights and haunted conversations in hushed tones. It started with the scientists, the very people who had first uncovered the danger. For them, this was a perversion of their life's work. Science was a torch meant to illuminate the darkness, not a blanket to be thrown over a monster hiding in the corner. Dr. Aris Thorne, a veteran astrophysicist whose name was synonymous with planetary defense, had spent 40 years gazing into the void, refining the tools we use to watch for incoming threats. He had helped build this system, this cosmic tripwire for humanity. Now he saw his work being twisted into a tool of public pacification. The cold, impartial numbers he had calculated were being used to construct a lie, and every press conference, every carefully worded public statement felt like a personal betrayal. For Thorne, the equation was simple, and absolute ignorance was not protection, it was vulnerability. To hide the truth of our fragility was to rob humanity of its agency, of its chance to prepare, to adapt, to demand better defenses, to become a truly spacefaring species in control of its own destiny. He was not alone. In the data analysis division of 3I, a young analyst named Kenji Tanaka found himself unable to reconcile the two realities he now inhabited. By day, he helped draft the sanitized reports, massaging the data to fit the new, less alarming narrative. By night, he would stare at the original, unredacted files of Scenario X, the raw numbers burning in his mind. He saw the world as a patient who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but whose doctors had decided out of a misguided sense of kindness not to tell them. He watched people on the street, laughing, commuting, living their lives, and he felt like a ghost separated from them by a wall of terrible knowledge. The public trust, he believed, was not a resource to be managed, but a sacred bond to be honored. Withholding this information was not a protective act. It was the ultimate act of paternalistic arrogance. It was a declaration that billions of people were children, unable to handle the complexities and dangers of their own existence. The stress of this cognitive dissonance began to wear him down, leaving him with a stark choice: live with the lie or risk everything for the truth. The final piece of this dissident puzzle fell into place not in a laboratory but in the polished corridors of geopolitical power. A senior liaison officer, whose job it was to bridge the gap between 3I's scientific findings and the policy decisions of member nations, watched the entire process with growing alarm. She had sat in the meetings where the science was debated not for its accuracy but for its political inconvenience. She heard officials discuss Scenario X less as a threat to human life and more as a threat to economic stability and their own political careers. She saw the document become a bargaining chip, its classification used as leverage in unrelated international disputes. The cynical manipulation of such a profound existential risk disgusted her. This wasn't about protecting the public from panic. It was about protecting a fragile status quo. It was about control. The public's right to know had been subjugated to the political class's desire to maintain order at any cost. For her, the suppression of Scenario X was not just a lie, but a symptom of a deeper sickness, a system that valued its own stability over the informed consent of the governed. These three souls, separated by age, expertise, and geography, found each other in the encrypted back channels of the digital world. They were bound by a shared, unbearable conviction that the secret was more dangerous than the truth it was meant to contain. They understood the risks. They knew that leaking a document of this classification was not just an act of whistleblowing. It was an act of treason in the eyes of the very governments they served. They would be hunted, disgraced, their lives and careers utterly destroyed. They debated the ethics of their own actions endlessly. Would they truly be saving the world, or would they be the ones to light the match of global chaos? Were they acting out of heroic principle or hubristic delusion? In the end, they came to a single stark conclusion. Humanity had a right to know what was lurking in the dark. It had a right to know how close it had come to oblivion, and it had a right to know that the systems in place to protect it had chosen secrecy over honesty. To continue to participate in the silence was to be complicit in a deception of historic proportions. Their decision was not made in a moment of passion, but forged over weeks of agonizing deliberation. It was a quiet, solemn pact made in the digital shadows. They began to meticulously assemble a package, the complete unredacted Scenario X document, the internal memos arguing for its suppression, the minutes from the secret meetings, and the original unaltered data streams from the Atlas network. They created a digital key to unlock a hidden truth, a key they intended to give to the entire world. They were building a bomb not of high explosives, but of pure information designed to shatter the carefully constructed peace. They were about to betray their oaths, their careers, and their security, all for a single desperate belief that an informed and even frightened public was stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more worthy of survival than a placidly ignorant one. As the final encrypted file was compiled, the world slept on, wrapped in a blanket of manufactured safety, completely unaware that its fundamental understanding of its place in the universe was about to be changed forever. The downward path of secrecy had reached its end, and the explosive ascent of truth was about to begin. It began not with a bang, nor the blinding flash of an incoming threat, but with the quietest act of rebellion imaginable, a single keystroke. In an anonymous server room, humming with the cool drone of indifference, a file cryptically named Scenario X detached from its classified moorings. It slipped through the digital ether, a ghost in the machine, a compressed package of terrifying truth, unleashed into the vast, unregulated ocean of the internet. For a few hours, it was nothing. Just another piece of data, drifting in a sea of trillions, a message in a bottle waiting for a shore. Then the first download, then 10, then 1,000. It moved like a contagion, hopping from encrypted message boards to the inboxes of investigative journalists, a rumor given digital flesh. By the time the sun rose over Europe, Scenario X was no longer a secret. It was a terrifying headline screaming from every phone and television screen. The carefully constructed reality we had all inhabited just yesterday, a reality where near misses were distant academic events shattered into a million pixels of raw, unadulterated data. The simulations, the trajectory plots, the chillingly precise calculations of what would have happened had 3I, Atlas's course varied by a mere fraction of a degree. It was all there, laid bare for a world that was utterly unprepared to see it. The immediate reaction was a global wave of cognitive dissonance. It was too much, too detailed, too horrifying to be real. It had to be a hoax, a sophisticated piece of disinformation, the work of a rogue state or a nihilistic hacker collective. That was the first line of defense, erected by a shell-shocked public and hastily reinforced by the institutions we trusted to protect us. From Washington to Brussels, from Moscow to Beijing, the official response was a masterclass in coordinated obfuscation. Spokespeople, their faces drawn and tight under the glare of press room lights, took to their podiums with carefully worded non-denials. They spoke of unverified documents, of malicious actors seeking to sow panic, of ongoing investigations into a serious cybersecurity breach. They never said the word false. They danced around the truth with a desperate, practiced choreography. But in their evasions, in the tremor, in their voices, the world sensed a deeper, more terrifying confirmation. They weren't fighting a lie. They were trying to contain a truth that had already escaped its cage and was now circling the globe, devouring the fragile trust that held our civilization together. This official stonewalling, meant to calm the waters, instead acted like gasoline on a fire. Every no comment was interpreted as a confession. Every refusal to answer a direct question was seen as proof of a conspiracy of silence, a paternalistic decision made in the dark to shield us from a reality they felt we couldn't handle. The vacuum, created by their silence, was filled with a roar of public fury, a cacophony of fear and accusation that echoed in every language. But Scenario X was not a manifesto of beliefs. It was a document of science. And this was its most dangerous, most powerful quality. It contained testable hypotheses, verifiable data points, and mathematical models that could be reverse-engineered and rerun. While the politicians postured and the talking heads debated, another group was already at work, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet hum of university server rooms and the lonely late-night glow of observatory control centers. The global scientific community, a decentralized and often fractious body, galvanized into a singular, unified purpose to find the truth. They were the only ones who could cut through the noise, the only ones who could definitively confirm or deny the document's terrifying claims. It was a race against time, not to stop a threat, but to validate a ghost. Teams in Chile, their telescopes still holding the faint residual data from 3I Atlas's departure, began frantically recalibrating their observations against the leaked orbital parameters. Astrophysicists in Germany, at the Max Planck Institute, abandoned their dark matter research. Their entire computational cluster, now dedicated to running the simulations from Scenario X, testing every variable, every gravitational perturbation. In Japan, a consortium of planetary defense experts who had spent their careers wargaming hypothetical impact events now found themselves staring at a simulation that was orders of magnitude more sophisticated and terrifying than anything they had ever conceived. It was a frantic global effort, a peer review process conducted in real time on the world stage, with the psychic stability of 7 billion people hanging in the balance. The first confirmations trickled in like the initial reports of a distant earthquake. An independent analysis from a Caltech postdoc posted on a preprint server showed that the core physics in the Scenario X model was sound. Then a team at the European Southern Observatory released a statement couched in cautious academic language that their own revised calculations of 3I Atlas's trajectory were not inconsistent with the data presented in the leak. Not inconsistent became the phrase of the day, a scientifically conservative way of saying, "My God, it's true." Each new verification was a hammer blow against the crumbling wall of official denial. The narrative began to irrevocably shift. The question was no longer if the document was real, but why on earth was it kept secret? Why were we, the inhabitants of the world that was nearly extinguished, the last to know about the bullet we had so narrowly dodged? Political fallout was swift and brutal. The public's fear, once a free-floating anxiety, now had a target: their own leaders. The trust that had been painstakingly built over generations evaporated in a matter of hours. In capitals around the world, the recriminations began. Leaders of opposition parties called for votes of no confidence. Newspaper editorials, once sober and measured, now blazed with righteous indignation, using words like betrayal and dereliction of duty. The international alliances that had formed the bedrock of global stability began to fray under the immense pressure of mutual suspicion. Was this information shared between intelligence partners? Did one nation know more than another? The spirit of scientific collaboration that had defined our exploration of the cosmos was suddenly poisoned by the specter of national secrecy and military classification. The chambers of power, once shielded from public view, were thrown wide open. Emergency hearings were convened, broadcast live across the globe. We watched as the very people we had entrusted with our survival, the heads of space agencies, intelligence directors, ministers of defense, were brought before committees of furious lawmakers. We saw them squirm under the relentless questioning, their confident facades cracking to reveal men and women trapped between their oaths of secrecy and the undeniable truth. They spoke of avoiding global panic, of maintaining civil order, of the complex calculus of national security. But their justifications, which might have seemed rational in a classified briefing room, sounded hollow and paternalistic in the court of global public opinion. They had made a choice, a decision to treat us like children, to shield us from the monsters under the bed, even when one of those monsters had come terrifyingly close to burning the whole house down. And then came the moment the world had been waiting for, the breaking point. It arrived not in the form of a dramatic resignation or another leak, but in a televised address delivered jointly by the heads of every major international space agency. They stood together, a united front of chastened authority against a stark, dark background. There were no flags, no political symbols, only the faces of the people who had seen the data first, who had lived with this terrible knowledge in silence. The lead administrator, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of her words, looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of billions of people hanging on her every syllable. She did not apologize. She did not make excuses. She simply stated the truth. The document known as Scenario X is authentic, she began. The world held its breath. The threat it detailed was real. The modeling it contains represents a consensus analysis of a catastrophic level event that was averted not by our designs or our defenses, but by the unpredictable grace of celestial mechanics. It was a confession, an admission, and a profound global humbling, all in one. She went on to explain the rationale for the secrecy, the fear of societal collapse, the impossible choice they faced. But it was that first sentence that mattered. The official narrative had finally, irrevocably surrendered to the undeniable truth. The great secret was out. The chasm between the governed and their governors had been exposed for all to see. This was the true climax. Not an impact, not a fireball in the sky, but a societal reckoning. A forced global confrontation with our own vulnerability and the fragility of our institutions. In the days that followed that address, the world did not collapse into panic as the leaders had feared. The fear was still there, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of everyday life. But it was now mingled with a new, powerful emotion, a profound sense of shared destiny. The argument was no longer about what had happened, but about what we would do now. Suddenly, conversations about asteroid detection budgets, planetary defense funding, and international scientific collaboration were not the domain of niche experts. They were happening at dinner tables, in classrooms, on buses and trains. The abstract concept of an extinction-level event had been made terrifyingly real. We had all, as a species, stood on the edge of the abyss together, and we had survived by sheer dumb luck. The shockwave of Scenario X's release had shattered our comfortable illusions. It exposed the terrifying inadequacy of our planetary defense systems, revealing them to be a patchwork of underfunded programs, a flimsy shield against an ocean of cosmic projectiles. It revealed the dangerous allure of secrecy, the instinct of those in power to control information rather than empower the public. But in the rubble of that shattered reality, something new was beginning to grow, a global demand for transparency. An urgent species-wide recognition that the sky was not a benign ceiling above our heads, but an active, dynamic, and potentially lethal environment. The debate was no longer academic, it was about survival. Humanity had been forced kicking and screaming into a new era of cosmic awareness. The age of innocence was over. The real work of safeguarding our future, a future we now knew was never guaranteed, was about to begin. And so the ghost of 3I, Atlas, recedes into the deep black. It is no longer a physical threat, no longer a point of light growing with terrifying promise in our most powerful lenses. Instead, it has become something far more enduring. It has become a memory etched not in stone or on monuments, but into the collective consciousness of our entire species. The journey we have taken together, from whispers of a leaked document to the silent global vigil under a threatened sky, is now over. But its echoes, its profound and unsettling reverberations are only just beginning to shape the world we now inhabit. Scenario X was never just a file filled with cold calculations. It was a key, unlocking a door in the human mind we never knew was there. Behind that door was a stark and humbling realization that our world, this impossibly vibrant oasis of life, hangs by a delicate gravitational thread in a cosmic shooting gallery. For generations we had looked to the heavens with a sense of detachment. It was a canvas for our myths, a laboratory for our science, a destination for our most audacious dreams. But it was always out there, separate from the soil under our feet. Scenario X shattered that illusion with the force of a planetary impact. It fused the celestial with the terrestrial, proving irrevocably that the fate of our world is written in the orbital mechanics of objects born billions of years before we ever looked up in wonder. The document, once a classified secret held by a desperate few, became humanity's shared inheritance, a brutal but necessary rite of passage. It forced us to grow up, to finally and fully comprehend that we are not merely residents of Earth, but crew members on a fantastically complex vessel navigating treacherous waters. And for the first time, we truly understood that the ship's log contained entries of past collisions and warnings of future ones. This new awareness is perhaps the most significant intangible legacy. It is a subtle but permanent shift in our perception, a background hum of cosmic precariousness that now informs our art, our politics, our science, and the stories we tell our children. We are now the children of a near miss, a generation that looked into the abyss and saw not a monster, but the simple, indifferent laws of physics staring back. From this profound psychological shift, a new global infrastructure was born. The fear that united us became the foundation for a shield we never knew we were capable of building, a testament to what we can achieve when our survival is the only item on the agenda. The old asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system, our heroic Atlas, was a brilliant but ultimately reactive measure, a tripwire. What we needed was a panopticon, a sentinel that could see everything, a system born from the harsh lessons of our close call with 3I, Atlas. And so we built it. Rising from the Atacama Desert in Chile and the high Tibetan Plateau are the twin installations of the Janus Array, our new eyes on the void. Named for the two-faced Roman god of beginnings and endings, the array looks both inward and outward simultaneously. One hemisphere of observatories meticulously maps the inner solar system, tracking anything that crosses the orbits of Earth and Mars, with a resolution that can spot an object the size of a car from the distance of the Sun. They miss nothing. Their software, driven by self-teaching neural networks, doesn't just plot trajectories. It learns them, identifying patterns in gravitational perturbations that might hint at a future threat, decades, even centuries, before it becomes one. The other half of the Janus Array looks outward beyond the orbit of Neptune, into the chilling darkness of the Oort cloud, the ghost-shrouded realm from which 3I, Atlas, emerged like an apparition. This is a far more difficult task, like spotting a single black grain of sand on an infinite black shore from a mile away. To achieve this, these telescopes do not rely solely on reflected light. They are gravitational cartographers sensing the subtle warps in space-time caused by these distant frozen wanderers. They listen for the faint gravitational whispers of comets and asteroids long before they ever begin their sunward plunge. Data from these disparate stations, separated by thousands of miles, is unified through a network of quantum-entangled communicators, ensuring that the information is not just shared, but shared instantly. There is no longer a delay, no longer a chance for a rogue object to slip through the net during the hours it takes for data to travel. The Janus Array provides us with our most precious new resource: time. Time to plan, time to build, time to launch, and time to think. Time, the one commodity we almost ran out of. But detection is only the first part of the promise we made to ourselves. The second and far more complex part is defense, the desperate 11th-hour mission that deflected 3I. Atlas was a masterpiece of improvisation, a gamble that paid off. We could never afford to roll those dice again. The legacy of Scenario X demanded a permanent standing planetary guard. Stationed in stable Lagrange points, gravitational islands in space orbiting the Sun, along with Earth, are the new Aegis interceptors. They are not weapons in the traditional sense, they are kinetic scalpels. Each Aegis is a modular spacecraft capable of deploying a range of mitigation strategies tailored to the specific nature of a threat. For a solid, iron-rich asteroid, it can deploy a heavy impactor, a simple brute force nudge designed to slightly alter the target's course. The change is minuscule, a deviation of millimeters per second, but over the millions of miles of an interplanetary journey, that tiny nudge becomes a miss of thousands, even millions of miles. It is the ultimate expression of cosmic leverage. For more fragile threats like the loosely packed rubble pile comets that so terrified us during the 3I Atlas crisis, a direct impact is too risky. It could shatter the object, turning one single bullet into a shotgun blast of galaxy-spanning debris, a far more unpredictable danger. For these, the Aegis deploys a standoff solution, the gravity tractor. The interceptor doesn't touch the comet at all. Instead, it flies alongside it for months, sometimes years, its own small mass exerting a persistent, gentle gravitational pull. It is the most delicate form of celestial shepherding, tugging the threat onto a new, benign path with an invisible leash woven from the fundamental forces of the universe itself. And for the most urgent short-notice threats, there is the laser broom. The Aegis can focus a powerful concentrated beam of light onto the surface of an asteroid or comet, not to destroy it, but to heat it. This heating vaporizes surface material ice rock dust, creating a jet, a plume of outgassing that acts like a tiny continuous rocket engine. This celestial blowtorch pushes the object slowly but surely off its collision course. These systems, from Janus to Aegis, represent a staggering investment, a redirection of resources once reserved for conflicts among ourselves. They are the pyramids and cathedrals of our time, monuments built not to gods or kings, but to the simple, powerful idea of a shared future. Yet for all this gleaming new hardware, the legacy of Scenario X is also fraught with new and persistent ethical dilemmas. The leak that saved the world also nearly broke it. It ignited global panic, market collapses, and a wave of profound distrust in the very institutions meant to protect us. This has left us with a troubling, unanswered question. What is the protocol for the next time? Do we tell the world the moment a credible threat is identified and risk the same chaos, the same societal breakdown, or do we withhold the information, allowing a select group to manage the crisis in secret, risking the far greater sin of a panicked last-minute revelation, or worse, a failure they tried to conceal? This debate rages on in the halls of governments and academic institutions. The advocates for total transparency argue that humanity has a fundamental right to know about any existential threat, that we have proven we can handle the truth, and that the collective intelligence of 7 billion people is a resource we cannot afford to sideline. They point to the citizen scientists who refined the orbit of 3I, Atlas, using backyard telescopes, a powerful argument for the wisdom of the crowd. On the other side are the pragmatists, the security advisors, who argue that public knowledge of a high-probability impact would make any coordinated defense effort impossible amidst widespread disorder. They contend that the first duty of any government is to maintain order, and that sometimes the burden of a terrible truth must be carried by a few for the good of the many. There is no easy answer. The question pits our highest ideals of openness against our most basic instincts for self-preservation. The legacy of Scenario X is not just a shield against rocks from space, but a mirror forcing us to confront the deepest complexities of how we govern ourselves in an age of cosmic vulnerability. Furthermore, the existence of deflection technology itself creates a new kind of geopolitical tension, a field now known as astropolitical deterrence. The same kinetic impactor designed to nudge an asteroid off course could, with different targeting, be used to divert a harmless asteroid onto a collision course with a rival nation. The technology that provides our ultimate shield could also be in the wrong hands, the ultimate weapon, untraceable, deniable, absolute. This has led to the creation of the Outer Space Treaty of the 22nd century, a binding international agreement placing all planetary defense systems under the joint command of a multinational scientific body. No single nation has the launch codes. No single leader can unilaterally decide the fate of a world or weaponize the heavens against a neighbor. It is a fragile, tense, but necessary peace, a system built on the principle of mutual assured survival. The document that began in secrecy has ironically forced us into an era of unprecedented mandatory cooperation. We must trust each other because the alternative, a world where nations hold the solar system hostage, is unthinkable. We learned the hard way that a threat to anyone anywhere is a threat to everyone everywhere. So where does this leave us, you and I, in the quiet aftermath? We are the inheritors of a new and solemn responsibility. The technologies we have built are magnificent, but they are not infallible. Telescopes can be blinded by solar flares, interceptors can suffer mechanical failures, and the universe is more vast and more creative in its potential threats than our imaginations can fully grasp. There will be other near misses. There will be other long nights of waiting. The cosmos has not been tamed. It never will be. What has changed is us. We have been awakened to the true nature of our home. It is not a fortress, but a fragile, beautiful, irreplaceable island drifting in an ocean of unimaginable scale and power. Scenario X was the storm that very nearly sank us, but it was also the storm that taught us how to build a better ship. It taught us that our greatest defense is not a piece of hardware, but an idea. The idea that we are one crew on one voyage. The vigilance required is not just mechanical, it is human. It is the continued funding of science, the education of the next generation of astronomers and engineers, the strengthening of international bonds, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. It is the courage to face uncomfortable truths and the wisdom to act on them together. The file labeled Scenario X is now declassified a museum piece, a historical artifact of a time when we were blissfully, dangerously unaware. But its lesson is a living, breathing thing. It is in the new resolve of our scientists, the quiet confidence of our defense operators, and in the way we all now look up at the night sky, not with fear, but with a newfound respect, a profound and humbling sense of our true place in the universe. We have been given a second chance, a chance purchased with panic and genius, and with it a sacred duty to remain awake, to keep watch, to ensure that we are never ever caught sleeping again. The great, silent darkness will keep testing us. And we, the children of the near miss, will be ready. We will be listening, we will be waiting, and we will be watching the sky.